I am Julian, 27 years old. A few months ago, my father slammed his heavy fist onto our solid oak dining table and screamed that I would be completely homeless without him. Right before I packed my bags in the dead of night and walked away from that house forever. While I was working grueling 14-hour IT shifts just to keep the household afloat, my own family was stealing the food I bought, ripping open my private corporate mail and laughing at my salary. My father looked me right in the eye, with my mother and brother smirking right beside him like a pair of loyal henchmen, and he said, "You live here because we allow you to. You are nothing without us. Don't forget that." But there was one massive thing they did not know. They did not know that I had already found my ultimate weapon. I had uncovered a massive, illegal line of credit my father had secretly taken out in my name, poisoning my financial future for years while he played the righteous, hard-working patriarch of the neighborhood. And now, he is the one facing absolute financial ruin, a potential federal lawsuit, and begging for my mercy while his credit crumbles to dust. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little world piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments down below. Now let's go back to where it all started. That night at the dinner table was supposed to be a normal Thursday in our quiet suburban cul-de-sac. The house smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and rosemary, a meal I had paid for entirely out of my own pocket after a quick run to Walmart the night before. I sat at the far end of the table, completely exhausted. My eyes were burning, physically stinging from staring at lines of code and server diagnostics since 6 in the morning. My shoulders ached. I just wanted to eat my meal in peace, take a hot shower, and sleep. But peace was a currency we simply did not trade in my family. My father, Victor, sat at the head of the table like a king holding court in his own private kingdom. He worked in construction management, a job that gave him a permanent sense of unquestionable authority and a booming, gravelly voice he loved to use to intimidate people. He was a man who believed that fear and respect were the exact same thing. My mother, Sylvia, was seated next to him, delicately sipping her cheap white wine. She was a master of the silent treatment and the passive-aggressive sigh. And then there was my brother, Sebastian, the absolute golden child of the family. He was 25, currently completely unemployed, and scrolling through his phone while casually chewing on the chicken leg I had specifically marinated and set aside for my own lunch the next day. I was tired. I was so tired of funding a life I wasn't even allowed to enjoy. So, I asked Sebastian a simple, reasonable question. I looked at him and asked, "Hey, could you please stop taking my meal preps? I buy my own groceries and I work long hours. I need that food for my shifts." That was all it took. The air in the dining room instantly shifted. It was like I had just insulted the Pope. Sebastian rolled his eyes, gave a little scoff, and didn't even bother to look up from his phone. But it was my father who reacted. The heavy thud of Victor's fist hitting the oak table made the silverware rattle and the wine glasses shake. The sound echoed in the kitchen. He leaned forward, his face flushing a deep, angry red, pointing a thick, calloused finger directly at my chest. "You're acting like a damn guest in your own home," he bellowed. The veins in his neck were bulging. "You think you're better than everyone else at this table because you've got some cushy desk job and a few computer certificates? You think you run things because you bought a few groceries?" He stood up, towering over the table. "You would be on the streets if it weren't for my generosity. You'd be homeless without us. You live here because we allow you to. Don't you ever forget that, Julian." I did not scream back. I did not throw my plate against the wall, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to do exactly that. I just sat there, frozen, and looked at the 4 people in that room. I looked at my younger sister, Nora, who was 18 and busy taking pictures of her mashed potatoes for social media, completely unfazed by the verbal abuse happening 2 feet away. It was just background noise to her. I looked at my mother, Sylvia, who simply adjusted her cloth napkin, took another sip of wine, and refused to make eye contact with me. She was complicit in her silence. And I looked at my father, a man whose entire sense of fragile self-worth came from making his eldest son feel incredibly small and dependent. I stood up slowly. The screech of my wooden chair pushing back against the hardwood floor was the only sound in the room. I looked my father dead in the eyes. I didn't blink. "Then maybe," I said, my voice eerily calm, "I won't be under your roof much longer." Before he could respond, before he could launch into another tirade about respect, I turned my back and walked down the hall. I opened the door to the basement and descended the rickety wooden stairs to my room. The basement was cold. It always was. The walls were unfinished, gray concrete, and the small window near the ceiling offered a lovely view of the dirt in our front flower beds. It smelled faintly of mildew and old cardboard boxes. I sat on the edge of my mattress, staring at the blank wall. Usually, after one of Victor's blow-ups, I would feel a deep, suffocating sense of guilt. I would wonder what I did wrong. I would wonder how I could be a better son, how I could earn their elusive approval. But tonight, for the first time in my entire 27 years of life, my father's words did not sting. They didn't make me feel guilty, and they didn't make me feel inadequate. Instead, they brought a crystal-clear, almost blinding sense of clarity. The heavy, suffocating fog of obligation, guilt, and family duty completely vanished from my mind in an instant. I realized, sitting in the damp cold of that basement, that I was not a son in this house. I was an asset. I was a human 401k plan. I was a built-in maid, a tech support hotline, a grocery provider, and a convenient emotional punching bag for a bitter man. I knew right then and there that I was going to leave. But I also knew I could not just pack a bag and storm out the front door in a fit of dramatic rage. That would give them exactly what they wanted. It would give them the satisfaction of calling me emotional, reckless, and ungrateful. They would spin the narrative to the entire extended family by the morning. No, I was going to leave surgically. I was going to extract myself from their lives, their finances, and their home so cleanly and completely that they would not even feel the blade until they tried to stand up on their own. I reached over to my small desk, pulled out my laptop, and opened a blank document. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room. I started making a checklist. But to truly understand why this checklist was not just a moving plan, but a matter of actual survival, you have to understand the debt I was born into. And I do not mean student loans or credit cards. I mean a psychological debt of existence. Growing up in Victor and Sylvia's household meant learning very early on that love always came with a steep invoice. I was the oldest of three, which in my parents' twisted worldview meant I was the ultimate test subject for their harsh parenting theories. They believed in the concept of toughening up. The world is a cruel, unforgiving place, Victor would constantly preach from his recliner, and it was his sacred duty to prepare me for it by being just as cruel. The incredibly funny thing was, this rigorous character-building preparation program only ever applied to me. I remember my 17th birthday vividly. Most kids get a party, maybe a nice dinner or a small gift. I was sitting in the kitchen, eating a bowl of cereal, when my father walked in. He didn't say happy birthday. He slid a plain, sealed white envelope across the granite counter until it hit my bowl. "Time to step up, Julian," he said, crossing his arms. "Rent is $400 a month. Due on the 1st. Don't be late." I was a junior in high school. My room was the unfinished basement. I was working part-time bagging groceries at a local supermarket, standing on my feet for 6 hours a day after school, dealing with rude customers just to make minimum wage. And now, my entire meager paycheck was going straight into my father's wallet. He called it a vital lesson in real estate and financial responsibility. I called it robbery, though I never dared to say that out loud. I just nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and handed over the cash every single month. I missed out on all the normal teenage milestones. There were no college funds set aside for me. There was no casual spending money for movie tickets, dates, or new sneakers. If I wanted something, I worked for it. Period. When I turned 19, after saving every single penny I could hide from my father, I finally bought my first car. It was a rusted-out 2002 Toyota Corolla with a failing transmission, peeling silver paint, and an interior that smelled like old cigarettes. But it was mine. I bought it with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I was so incredibly proud. I parked it in the driveway, walked into the house, and excitedly asked my dad to come outside and look at it. Victor walked out, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He slowly circled the beaten-up car, kicked one of the bald front tires with his heavy work boot, and smirked. "Looks like a piece of junk," he chuckled. "But it looks like you're finally learning how the real world works. No handouts here." I genuinely thought he was proud of my independence. I wanted to believe that his harshness was just his way of showing love. It took me years to realize the dark truth. He just enjoyed watching me struggle. It made him feel powerful. The contrast between my brutal upbringing and my siblings' lavish treatment was absolutely staggering. Sebastian, who was 2 years younger than me, lived by a completely different set of rules. He was the golden boy. He played varsity baseball, he had the charm, and he could do no wrong in Sylvia's eyes. When Sebastian turned 18, he did not get a white envelope demanding rent. He got a rented Porsche for his high school prom weekend. My parents paid nearly $1,000 for the rental. And what did Sebastian do with it? On the way home from the dance, he was texting on his phone, blew a stop sign, and crashed the luxury car straight into a brick mailbox at the end of our neighborhood. I remember waking up to the sound of sirens. I stood on the front lawn in the cold night air, watching the flashing blue and red police lights illuminate the crumpled hood of the Porsche. The brick mailbox was completely destroyed. And my mother? She wasn't yelling. She wasn't demanding repayment. She was standing on the curb, hugging Sebastian, rubbing his shoulders and cooing, "It's okay, baby. The insurance will cover it. Cars can be replaced. The most important thing is that you're safe." There were no lectures about responsibility. There were no demands that he get a grueling part-time job to pay off the massive insurance deductible. He was just a boy who made a silly mistake. Meanwhile, my sister Nora, the youngest, had a bedroom upstairs that looked like a Best Buy showroom. She had the newest iPhone, a Mac computer, an iPad, and designer clothes, all fully funded by the endless bank of mom and dad. I accepted this sick dynamic for years because I thought that was just the heavy burden of being the eldest child. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was responsible enough, if I paid enough bills, they would eventually respect me. I skipped traditional college because I simply could not afford the tuition, and I absolutely refused to drown myself in student loan debt just to please them. Instead, I took brutal night shifts in Amazon warehouses. I spent my days sleeping for 4 hours and my evenings teaching myself IT certifications online. Networking, cybersecurity protocols, server administration. It was exhausting, mind-numbing work, but by the time I was 24, my relentless grinding paid off. I landed a solid, full-time remote job doing network management for a mid-sized tech company. It was not a millionaire's salary, but it was a comfortable living. It was mine. Then the global pandemic hit. The world shut down, and the fragile, delicate balance of our household completely collapsed into chaos. Sebastian, who had been lazily working as a bartender downtown, lost his job. Within a week, he packed up his apartment and moved his boxes back into his old bedroom upstairs. I naturally assumed my father would hand him a white envelope on the first of the month. After all, the real world is harsh, right? No handouts. But no. My mother, Sylvia, quickly held a family meeting and established that Sebastian was going through a very difficult emotional transition. She insisted that adding financial pressure to his fragile state would completely break him. So, Sebastian lived rent-free. Our home turned into a living nightmare. Sebastian treated the house like an all-inclusive, 5-star resort. He slept until noon every single day. He played loud, violent video games until dawn, screaming into his headset. He left his dirty dishes, empty soda cans, and crusted plates on every available surface in the kitchen and living room. Nora, whose high school had transitioned to online learning, spent her days blasting TikTok trends at full volume and complaining that the Wi-Fi speed was too slow. And then there was me. I was still trapped in the basement. I was still paying my rent, which my father graciously increased to $500 to cover the rising utility costs. I was still buying a large portion of the household groceries because Sebastian was eating us out of house and home. I was working full-time from a cramped, cheap desk I bought at a thrift store. I was trying to conduct highly technical, professional Zoom meetings with corporate clients while the ceiling above me literally shook and groaned from Sebastian jumping around in virtual reality games. The disrespect reached a whole new level when Sebastian decided my career was a joke. I would come upstairs to the kitchen to grab a quick cup of coffee to keep myself awake, and he would be sprawled out on the couch in his pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, scratching his stomach. He would look at me in my crisp button-down shirt and laugh. "Must be nice to just play on a computer in your pajamas all day," he would sneer. "Some of us actually do real physical labor, Julian. Clicking a mouse isn't a real job. You're practically on vacation." I remember looking at my father during one of these specific exchanges. Victor was reading a newspaper at the table. I expected him to finally, just once, defend the son who was actually paying the bills and working 45 hours a week. Instead, my father chuckled. He folded his newspaper, took a sip of his beer, and nodded in agreement with Sebastian. He looked at me with total disdain and said, "He's not wrong, Julian. If the power grid goes down, your little job is completely useless. You're not exactly essential to society, are you? You just type on a keyboard." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned stark white. My own father, the man who happily, eagerly deposited my rent check into his bank account every first of the month, was publicly humiliating me just to bond with the unemployed son who contributed absolutely nothing to the household. And then work got worse. My IT department was severely understaffed due to budget cuts. A senior coworker named Derek made it his personal mission to pass all his overflow tickets and server maintenance on to me. Knowing I was remote, desperate to keep my job, and eager to prove myself, I was putting in massive, unpaid overtime. I was drowning in server migrations, patching security vulnerabilities at 3 a.m., barely sleeping, and feeling deeply, clinically depressed. I was funding the lifestyle of a family that actively despised me. The pressure was building in my chest, tightening like a vice, pushing me closer and closer to the absolute edge. I just needed one final push to make me snap. And my family, in all their staggering arrogance, gladly provided it. It was a bleak Tuesday evening in mid-November. I had just logged off my computer after a brutal, mind-numbing 14-hour shift. I had spent the entire day dealing with a critical server crash that Derek had conveniently ignored before logging off early for a golf weekend. My head was pounding with a vicious migraine. My eyes were completely bloodshot from staring at the harsh blue light of my dual monitors. I had not eaten a single thing since a piece of dry toast at 6 in the morning. All I wanted in the world was to walk upstairs, heat up one of the expensive, high-protein pre-packaged meals I had bought for the week, take a hot shower, and sit in absolute silence. I dragged my heavy legs up the wooden basement stairs and pushed open the door to the kitchen. The very first thing I noticed was a stack of empty plastic meal prep containers sitting in the sink, unwashed, with fork scratches on the bottom. My containers. Panic and irritation flared in my chest. I rushed over to the stainless steel refrigerator and pulled the door open. The bottom shelf, the shelf I had carefully organized and claimed the night before, was completely barren. My grilled lemon pepper chicken, my protein shakes, my roasted asparagus, my expensive Greek yogurt. All of it, gone. Over $80 worth of groceries, wiped out in a single afternoon. I slowly pushed the fridge door shut. I turned around and looked into the adjacent living room. Sebastian was sitting in my father's leather recliner. He was barefoot, wearing a stained white tank top, watching a Loud Sports highlight reel on the big screen TV. He had a wooden toothpick in his mouth, casually picking at his teeth. I walked over, standing between him and the television. My voice was remarkably steady, despite the volcanic rage boiling in my chest. "Sebastian," I said, "where is the food I bought yesterday?" He didn't even flinch. He didn't look away from the television screen. He just shifted his weight in the chair, smiled around the toothpick, and let out a small burp. "You're welcome," he said smoothly. "The chicken was a little dry, needed some more salt, but it wasn't bad. Don't worry about it. I bought that for my work shifts. I said, my voice dropping an octave. You don't buy groceries. You don't pay rent. Why are you eating my food? He finally looked at me, his eyes full of arrogant amusement. What's mine is yours, bro. That's what family is for. Stop being so cheap. I wanted to hit him. I really, truly wanted to ball up my fist and wipe that smug, entitled grin right off his face. My hands were shaking, but I knew if I touched him, Sylvia would call the police on me, and Victor would throw me out on the street. I was trapped. I just turned around and walked back down to the basement, skipping dinner entirely. My stomach growled, but the betrayal made me too sick to eat anyway. I thought that was the absolute worst they could do. I thought petty theft and entitlement were the peak of their disrespect. I was so incredibly wrong. The real dagger to the back came 2 weeks later. I had been eagerly expecting a highly confidential piece of mail from my company's corporate HR department. I had recently completed a massive cybersecurity audit that saved the company thousands of dollars, and my manager, Mr. Henderson, had pushed through a significant promotion for me. The mail was a physical copy of my newly updated compensation package, including a substantial salary bump and a generous yearly bonus structure. I always checked the mailbox the second I finished work, but that specific day, I was stuck in a mandatory late-afternoon strategy meeting. By the time I finally logged off and walked upstairs to the kitchen, the family was already gathered around the kitchen island. They were laughing. It wasn't warm, familial laughter. It was that specific, ugly, mocking kind of laughter they only shared when they were tearing someone else down. As I walked into the room, the laughter abruptly stopped. The silence was deafening. My father was leaning casually against the granite counter, holding a crisp white piece of paper. My mother, Sylvia, was looking at me with a strange, calculating gleam in her eyes, the look a predator gives its prey. Sebastian was grinning from ear to ear. I looked down at the counter. Resting next to the fruit bowl was a ripped envelope with my company's blue logo embossed on the top left corner. My full legal name was clearly printed on the front, right above a stamp that read, "Strictly Confidential." My father held up the paper in his hand. It was my official pay stub and compensation letter. "You didn't tell us you were making this kind of money, Julian," Victor said, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. My heart completely stopped in my chest. The blood instantly drained from my face, leaving me cold. It is a federal offense to open someone else's mail, but in this house, boundaries, privacy, and basic human decency did not exist. I looked directly at my mother. My voice was a hoarse whisper. "Why did you open my mail?" Sylvia offered a careless, elegant shrug, brushing a piece of lint off her sweater. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Julian. Came to our house. It was mixed in with the water and electric bills. It was just a silly accident. We were just curious." Sebastian chimed in from the living room couch. "Yeah, relax, man. It's not like we hacked your bank account and stole it. Turns out you're loaded. Must be nice keeping all that cash to yourself." Victor took a step forward, aggressively tapping the paper with his index finger. "With this kind of salary," he growled, "paying $500 a month is an absolute joke. You're taking advantage of us. You're living here like a king while we struggle to keep the lights on. Starting next month, rent is $1,000, plus half the utilities. We are your family. We clothed you. We fed you. We supported you your entire life. And you think you can hide your wealth from us?" I stood completely still. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, connecting dots I had been far too blind and trusting to see before. An accident? A mistake mixed in with the bills? No. My company envelopes were distinct, thick, high-quality parchment paper, clearly marked confidential. You do not accidentally rip one open thinking it's the water bill. And then, my eyes darted to the far corner of the kitchen counter. Peeking out from under a stack of Better Homes and Gardens magazines was a familiar manila folder. A folder I specifically kept hidden in the bottom, back drawer of my desk in the basement. A folder containing my last 3 years of tax returns. My mother hadn't just accidentally opened a piece of mail. She had waited until I was locked in a corporate Zoom meeting. She had crept down into my basement room, rummaged through my private desk drawers like a common thief, and hunted for sensitive financial documents to figure out exactly how much money they could extort from me. They were not acting like a family asking for help. They were acting like a cartel demanding a larger cut of the profits. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me physically breathless. They had invaded my privacy, violated my only sanctuary, and were now using my hard-earned, grueling success as a weapon to drain my bank account further. My father crossed his thick arms over his chest, waiting for me to argue. He wanted a fight. He thrived on conflict, on asserting his dominance, on crushing my spirit. He wanted me to scream and yell so he could put me in my place and remind me that he owned me. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. I looked at my father. I looked at the manila folder. I looked at the ripped envelope. The anger I felt was no longer hot, fiery, and explosive. It was freezing cold. It was absolute, chilling, sociopathic detachment. The final, fragile, fraying string of hope that tied me to these people finally snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain that the money was for a down payment on my own life. I just nodded slowly. I looked right into Sylvia's calculating eyes and said, "You're right, Mom. It means you're right. I shouldn't keep secrets from you." I turned around and walked away. I heard my father mutter something loudly about me finally learning some damn respect, but the words just bounced off my back like rain on concrete. I went down to the basement. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and sat down at my desk. I opened my laptop. The decision was absolute. There would be no more screaming matches, no more forced family dinners, no more compromises. I was going to sever every single tie. I was going to ghost them while living under the exact same roof, and by the time they realized what was happening, the bank would be empty, the lights would be off, and I would be a ghost. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even crested the horizon. I didn't feel exhausted. For the first time in years, my mind was razor-sharp. The crushing emotional weight that had suffocated me for 27 years was completely gone, entirely replaced by pure, calculating logistics. I was operating on adrenaline and spite. I immediately emailed my manager, Mr. Henderson, and took 2 personal days, claiming I was dealing with a sudden family emergency, which, in a way, was the absolute truth. I was executing an emergency evacuation. My very first call was to my best friend, Marcus. Marcus was the only person who knew exactly how toxic and abusive my family truly was. He had spent years watching me wither away, constantly telling me to pack up and get out. When I called him at 7 a.m. and told him the plan was finally in motion, he didn't ask a single question. He just asked, "What size moving truck do we need, and what time are we rolling out?" By noon that day, I was sitting in the leasing office of a small, quiet, one-bedroom apartment on the far north side of town. It was nothing luxurious. It was on the second floor of an older brick building, but it had a strict, no-nonsense property manager named Vince, secure coded access to the lobby, and absolutely zero connection to my past. It was clean, it was quiet, and most importantly, it was mine. I signed the lease electronically, paid the security deposit and first month's rent in full, and scheduled my move-in date for that coming Sunday. I had exactly 4 days to dismantle my entire existence in my parents' house. Then began the surgical uncoupling. This was the part one had to execute perfectly. For years, I had been the invisible, unappreciated pillar holding up the entire household infrastructure. My parents loved to call me useless, but my name was on almost everything that made their lives comfortable. I sat at my computer and methodically, ruthlessly canceled it all. The high-speed fiber-optic internet required for Sebastian's gaming and Nora's endless TikTok scrolling? In my name, paid by my debit card. I contacted the provider and scheduled a hard disconnect for 8 a.m. on Monday morning. The family Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime accounts, all linked to my primary email and my bank account. I didn't just cancel them. I logged into every single device remotely, signed them out, changed the passwords to random strings of characters, and removed my payment methods. They wouldn't even know what happened until the "Who's watching?" screen failed to load. I even called the local utility company, Years ago, Victor had manipulated me into putting the secondary electricity account, which covered the basement, the massive garage where he kept his tools, and the central air conditioning, under my name, claiming it would help build my young credit. I removed myself as the primary account holder, letting it default back to Victor's name and forcing the company to send him a massive deposit request for the transfer. I felt like an undercover operative meticulously dismantling a ticking time bomb. I was moving in total, absolute silence. Whenever I left the basement to use the kitchen or the bathroom, I kept my facial expression completely blank. I didn't engage in small talk. When Sylvia aggressively asked me if I liked the dry meatloaf she cooked, I just nodded, washed my plate, and retreated. I was a phantom, but dealing with highly manipulative, controlling people means you can never, ever lower your guard. On Thursday evening, I almost made a fatal error that would have ruined everything. I was in my room, quietly packing a box of expensive tech manuals, external hard drives, and cables, when my phone vibrated on the desk. It was a text message from my cousin, Elena. Elena was Sylvia's niece, and she had always seemed like the only sensible, empathetic one in the entire extended family. We had always gotten along well at Thanksgiving dinners. "Hey Julian," the text read. "Aunt Sylvia mentioned things are getting a bit tense over there with Uncle Victor. Just checking in on you. You doing okay? Let me know if you need to vent." For a brief, vulnerable second, the exhausted, deeply lonely part of me wanted to confide in her. I wanted validation. I wanted someone who shared my bloodline to tell me I was not crazy, to confirm that my parents were actually suffocating me. I picked up my phone and started typing a reply. I thought maybe I could trust her enough to ask if I could store a few boxes of my clothes in her garage over the weekend, so my parents wouldn't notice the sudden disappearance of my belongings from the basement. Before I hit send, my throat felt dry. I needed a glass of water. I set the phone down and quietly crept up the wooden basement stairs. The house was eerily quiet, but as I neared the top of the stairs, I heard my mother's voice coming from the kitchen. She was on her cell phone, speaking in a hushed, conspiratorial, urgent tone. "Yes, Elena, just keep pressing him," Sylvia whispered, her voice laced with venom. "He's acting very strange. He's too quiet. He hasn't complained about the rent increase yet, and he's been staying in that basement for 2 days. See if he mentions moving in with that friend of his, Marcus. Victor wants to know his exact next move, so we can head it off and lock down his bank accounts if he tries to run." I froze on the top step. My stomach plummeted to the floor. The air was knocked out of my lungs. Elena was not checking on me. She was a spy. She was a flying monkey. They were using the only family member I actually tolerated to extract intelligence and track my movements. My own mother was running a psychological surveillance operation on me, treating me like a flight risk prisoner rather than a son. I silently backed down the stairs, step by careful step, returning to the dark safety of my room. The momentary, sharp sting of betrayal washed over me, but it quickly hardened into impenetrable steel. They wanted to play spy games? Fine. I work in cybersecurity. I know how to feed false data to a threat. I picked up my phone, deleted my honest, drafted message, and instead, I sent a perfectly crafted, pathetic lie. "Hey Elena, thanks so much for checking in. It's really tough, but I'm just putting my head down and working hard to afford the new rent. Actually, I was looking at some super cheap, tiny studio apartments out in the South District. Just dreaming, really. Don't tell my mom. She'd flip if she knew I was even looking." The South District was a solid hour's drive in the complete opposite direction of where my new apartment actually was. I threw them a juicy bone, a shiny distraction to keep their eyes pointed the wrong way while I slipped out the back door. Friday and Saturday were an absolute masterclass in deception. I packed everything I truly cared about into small, nondescript gym bags and backpacks. Every single time I left the house, I took a bag with me, tossing it into the trunk of my Corolla, pretending I was going to the gym, running to the grocery store, or getting coffee. My room looked exactly the same to the naked eye. The posters were still on the walls. The bed was perfectly made. My decoy computer monitor was still on the desk. But inside the drawers and the closet, it was entirely, completely empty. Sunday night finally arrived. The tension in my chest was so tight it felt hard to breathe. I waited until 1 a.m. The house was completely, totally silent, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator upstairs and Victor's loud snoring. Marcus was parked 2 blocks away in his pickup truck, waiting for my signal. I grabbed my final 2 bags, my primary laptop, and my good monitor. I looked around the concrete basement one last time. This damp, depressing, suffocating room was the only home I had known for a decade. Before I walked out, I took a framed photograph off my desk. It was a picture of me, my parents, and my siblings from my high school graduation. We were all smiling for the camera. We looked like a real, loving family. I took the photo out of the frame. I stared at it for 3 seconds. Then, I tore it perfectly down the middle, separating myself from them. I took my half and I left their half lying face down on the empty desk. I walked out the back door, locked it behind me, got into my car, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror even once. I thought the hardest part was over. I thought the worst damage they could possibly do to me was safely in the past. But as I would soon discover in my new, quiet apartment, Victor's ultimate betrayal was not emotional abuse. It was a staggering financial crime that could have destroyed my entire future. The very first morning in my brand new apartment was a sensory experience I will carry with me for the rest of my natural life. I woke up at exactly 7 in the morning. For the first time in an entire decade, I was not violently startled awake by the sound of Sebastian screaming obscenities into his expensive gaming headset, nor was I jolted out of a dead sleep by the heavy, aggressive thud of Victor's steel-toed construction boots stomping across the hardwood floors directly above my head. I woke up to absolute, pristine, golden silence. The morning sunlight was streaming brightly through the large, uncovered window of my second-floor bedroom, casting long, warm shadows across the bare hardwood floor. The air inside the apartment smelled faintly of fresh white paint, pine surface cleaner, and the crisp, clean scent of the brand-new cotton sheets I had bought for myself just 2 days prior. I lay there on my mattress, which was currently resting directly on the floor because my solid wood bed frame was still in transit, and I just stared up at the smooth, unblemished ceiling. I took a deep, deliberate breath. My lungs expanded fully. For the first time in my entire adult life, my chest did not feel like it was being crushed in an industrial vice. I felt incredibly, deeply safe. I was finally out. I had escaped the prison they built for me. But as I lay there basking in the newfound quiet, I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that a massive Category 5 emotional hurricane was currently making landfall across town at my parents' house. I rolled over and picked up my cell phone from the floor. The screen illuminated the dim room, and my lock screen was an absolute battlefield of digital desperation. I had a chaotic, glowing wall of notifications. There were exactly 42 missed calls, the vast majority from my mother, Sylvia, and a dozen aggressive back-to-back calls from Victor. There were 87 unread text messages. A year ago, seeing that many angry notifications from my family would have sent me into a full-blown panic attack. I would have been physically shaking, desperate to fix whatever I had allegedly broken or forgotten to do. But today, I did not feel a single shred of anxiety. I felt completely, clinically detached. I felt like a seasoned researcher observing a highly predictable, incredibly toxic chemical reaction from behind a thick wall of bulletproof glass. I unlocked the phone and opened the text thread from Sylvia. The rapid progression of her messages over the last 8 hours was a fascinating, horrifying study in parental entitlement, manipulation, and utter panic. At 6 in the morning, the tone was demanding, annoyed, and strictly transactional. "Julian, the internet is not working. The router is flashing red. Did you forget to pay the bill again? Sebastian has a major online gaming tournament today and he needs the high-speed connection. Call the company and fix it right now." At 7:15, the casual annoyance had escalated into righteous anger. "Julian, the power in the garage and the basement is completely out. Your father's expensive tools are in there, and the deep freezer full of meat is going to thaw. Wake up and call the electric company right now. This is absolutely ridiculous. We expect you to handle these things. At 8:30, the tone completely shifted. She had finally walked down the wooden stairs to the basement, opened my door, and seen the empty desk drawers, the stripped bed, and the torn graduation photograph I had left face down on the desk. Where are your clothes? Where is your computer? Julian, answer your phone right this second. What kind of sick, twisted joke is this? Are you hiding at Marcus's house? By 9 o'clock, she was in full emotional manipulation mode, weaponizing guilt. You are an incredibly selfish person. You just abandon your own family in the dark? You think you can survive out there on your own in the real estate market without us? Call your father immediately. He is furious. You are tearing this family apart. I didn't reply to a single one. I just swiped the notifications away, clearing the screen, walked into my small, quiet kitchen, and brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee. I poured myself a mug, walked over to my small dining table, and sat down at my laptop. I needed to tie up a few lingering digital ends. I wanted to make absolutely sure I had completely removed my primary credit card from the family's shared Amazon Prime account so they could not order expensive items on my dime out of spite. But while I was clicking through my old, secondary email inbox, an account I mainly used for junk mail, old software subscriptions, and spam when I lived at the house, I saw something that made the hot coffee instantly turn to ice in my stomach. It was an email from a third-party debt collection agency. The subject line was written in aggressive, bold red letters, urgent, final notice of default, joint revolving credit account. My brow furrowed deeply. My heart skipped a heavy beat. I had absolutely zero debt. I paid off my rusted Toyota Corolla years ago, and I used a single, low-limit credit card that I paid in full every single month just to build my credit score for a future mortgage. I clicked the email, my hand hovering nervously over the trackpad. Attached to the email was a highly detailed PDF containing a formal, legally binding collection notice. It detailed a massive joint revolving line of credit that had been opened exactly 2 years prior. The stated purpose of the loan on the document was home improvement and real estate upgrades. The current outstanding balance, including massive late fees, compounding interest, and aggressive collection penalties, was exactly $6,882.47. The primary account holder listed on the document was Victor. The secondary joint account holder, who was fully and equally liable for the entire debt, was me, Julian. My social security number was partially redacted, but the last 4 digits were unmistakably mine. My hands began to shake. It was not out of fear. It was out of a sudden, blinding, volcanic rage that threatened to consume me. My mind raced backward in time, scrubbing through memories. 2 years ago, when I was 25, Victor had cornered me in the kitchen while I was rushing out the door for a brutal night shift at the warehouse. He had shoved a wooden clipboard in my face, aggressively tapping a blue pen against the paper. He told me he desperately needed my signature on a routine homeowners association permit application to expand the back deck of the house. He claimed the HOA required all adult residents living at the property to sign off on exterior modifications. I was exhausted, sleep-deprived, naive, and completely trusting of the man who raised me. I scribbled my signature on the bottom line without reading the fine print hidden on the second page. He didn't use that signature for a deck permit. There was no deck. He used my name, my clean credit history, and my decent salary to co-sign an unsecured credit line because his own credit score was absolute garbage. And looking at the payment history attached to the notice, he had not made a single payment on it in over 6 full months. Suddenly, every single thing about the last few months made perfect, horrifying sense. The reason Victor demanded $1,000 a month in rent wasn't just his usual greed. It was absolute desperation. The creditors were closing in on him. He was drowning in hidden debt. The reason he was so aggressively, violently furious about me moving out wasn't because he would miss having his oldest son around. It was because he was losing his primary financial human shield. He needed my income to cover the massive hole he had dug for himself. He had secretly weaponized my identity, actively sabotaging my financial future to fund his fake, wealthy suburban patriarch lifestyle. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. Part of me wanted to run down to my car, drive back to that house, kick the front door completely off its hinges, and demand answers. I wanted to scream in his face until my throat bled. But I stopped myself. I forced my breathing to slow down. Emotional outbursts and screaming matches were Victor's game. I play an entirely different game now. I play chess. Before I could even formulate my legal strategy, the intercom buzzer in my apartment blared loudly, shattering the peaceful silence of my morning. My building had a highly secure front door. You needed an electronic key fob to enter, or a resident had to manually buzz you in from their unit. I walked over to the intercom screen mounted on the wall by the door and pressed the camera button. Standing on the front steps of my building, looking completely unhinged and frantic, was my father. His face was beet red, his polo shirt was untucked, and he was violently stabbing the buzzer button with his thick thumb. I later figured out exactly how he found me. Marcus had rented the moving truck under his own name to keep my name off the radar. But Victor had aggressively cornered Marcus's elderly mother at the local grocery store that morning, intimidating and manipulating her into giving up the address of the building Marcus was helping a friend move into. I didn't press the button to buzz him in. I threw on my jacket, unlocked my door, walked out of my apartment, and headed down the carpeted stairs to the lobby. The property manager, Vince, an older, retired military veteran who lived on the first floor and took zero nonsense from anyone, was already standing in the lobby. He was holding a cup of black coffee, looking warily at Victor through the heavy glass door. I nodded to Vince, pushed the heavy glass door open, and stepped outside onto the concrete stoop. The chilly morning air hit my face. "Julian!" Victor barked immediately, lunging forward as if he was going to grab my shirt collar. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You cut the power? You canceled the internet? You think you can just pack up your bags in the middle of the night like a little coward and walk away from your responsibilities?" "I don't have any responsibilities to you," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. "I paid my rent. I bought my own food. I owe you absolutely nothing." "You owe me everything," he screamed, his voice echoing down the quiet street, drawing the attention of a woman walking her dog on the opposite sidewalk. "I put a roof over your head. I raised you. You get your ass back in that car, you come home, and you turn the damn utilities back on right now. You are tearing your mother's heart out. You are destroying this family." I looked at him. I really, truly looked at him. Stripped of his home court advantage, standing on the sidewalk of a building he did not own, he didn't look like an intimidating king. He looked like a desperate, pathetic, aging man losing his grip on control. "I'm not coming back, Victor," I said. It was the first time I had ever called him by his first name. He physically recoiled as if I had struck him across the face with a baseball bat. "You listen to me," he snarled, stepping closer, trying to use his physical size to cast a shadow over me. "You don't survive out here without family. You're going to fail. You don't know how the real world works. You're going to end up with nothing." "Like your credit score?" I asked softly. Victor completely froze. The aggressive red color instantly drained from his face, leaving him pale and sickly. His mouth hung open slightly, forming a silent word he couldn't push out. "I found the emails, Victor," I continued, stepping right into his personal space, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "I found the collection notices. $6,882. You forged my legal consent on a joint revolving credit line 2 years ago under the guise of an HOA permit. You committed federal identity theft against your own son to fund a lifestyle you clearly cannot afford." He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. The blustering, righteous anger completely evaporated in an instant, replaced by raw, naked terror. "Julian, you don't understand," he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "It was just a temporary fix. Things got tight. I was going to pay it off, I swear. I just needed some time. You can't make a big deal out of this. It stays in the family. We protect our own." No, it doesn't, I said coldly. I looked over my shoulder at Vince, the landlord, who was watching the entire exchange closely through the glass, absorbing every single word. Then I looked back at Victor's panicked eyes. Expect a future where you're homeless, I said clearly, repeating the exact vicious threat he had hurled at me just days prior at the dinner table. Because by the time my lawyer is done with you, the bank is going to foreclose on that house, and you won't even be able to rent a cheap motel room. Julian, please, he whispered, actually reaching out to grab my arm in a desperate plea. I stepped back quickly, looking at his hand with utter disgust. If you ever come to this building again, I will have Vince call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. And if you ever try to contact me, I will expedite the police report for fraud. Go home, Victor. I turned around, walked back inside the building, and let the heavy glass door click shut and lock securely behind me. I didn't look back. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, sat down at my laptop, and began the real work. The destruction of his empire was just getting started. The very next morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, I picked up my phone and called a woman named Stella. Stella was a sharp, ruthless, brilliant consumer advocacy lawyer I had met at a corporate networking event a year prior. When I met her, she had spoken passionately about financial abuse within families, and I had kept her business card tucked safely in my wallet ever since, hoping I would never actually need it. I sat in my quiet living room and explained the entire situation to her over the phone. I detailed the fake HOA permit, the forged signature, the hidden debt, the aggressive collection emails, and Victor's transparent attempt to extort me for higher rent to secretly cover his financial crimes. Stella didn't even flinch. Her voice on the other end of the line was calm, collected, and fiercely competent. She told me she had seen this exact brand of familial financial abuse 100 times before. She explained that, in the strict eyes of the law, what Victor did was not a simple family misunderstanding. It was textbook, prosecutable identity fraud. Here is exactly what we are going to do, Julian, Stella said, her tone crisp and authoritative. We are not just going to dispute this with a polite letter. We are going to sever his financial lifeline completely, and we are going to make sure the liability lands squarely where it belongs. First, you need to go to your local precinct and file an official police report for identity theft. You don't have to press criminal charges today if you aren't ready to see him in handcuffs, but we absolutely need that paper trail. Once we have that official police report number, my office will submit an identity theft affidavit to the 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. We will dispute the joint account entirely based on fraudulent authorization. What happens to the actual debt? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Will the collection agency still come after me? It defaults entirely onto him, Stella explained smoothly. Because he was the primary beneficiary of the funds, the money went to his accounts, and we have proof that your signature was obtained under false pretenses regarding real estate permits. The creditors will be legally forced to remove your name from the liability. Your credit score will rebound almost immediately once the dispute clears. His score, however, will completely tank. The creditors will aggressively pursue him for the full amount, and because he is currently delinquent, they will likely seek a rapid court judgment. That means wage garnishment, or placing a lien directly on his house. I smiled. It was a cold, calculating, profoundly satisfying smile. Do it, I said. File everything. Send me whatever I need to sign. I spent the next 48 hours gathering every single shred of supporting evidence. I printed the email threads from the collection agency. I pulled the county property records showing there was never any HOA permit filed for a deck expansion at my parents' address. I downloaded my bank statements spanning the last 2 years, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had never made a single payment toward that specific credit line, further distancing myself from the fraudulent account. I took the entire thick folder to the police station, filed the report with a sympathetic detective, and sent the police report number directly to Stella. We submitted the massive legal packet to the credit bureaus on Wednesday afternoon. But I was not done. My father was legally handled, but the rest of the parasites living comfortably in that house needed to be dealt with. I thought about Sebastian, the golden boy, the one who relentlessly mocked my career while stealing the food I paid for. I remembered exactly how Sebastian funded his lavish, rent-free lifestyle while pretending to be a victim of the pandemic. He claimed to be completely unemployed to Sylvia, but I knew for an absolute fact he was working lucrative under-the-table shifts as a bartender at a shady downtown nightclub, bringing home hundreds of dollars in untaxed cash every single week. On top of that, he was actively trading cryptocurrency. Months ago, he had foolishly bragged to me about his massive, untaxed gains, boasting about how he was outsmarting the financial system. He hadn't filed a state or federal tax return in over 2 years. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the rules didn't apply to him. I sat down at my laptop, accessed a secure VPN to mask my location, and navigated directly to the official IRS website. There is a specific form, Form 3949A, used strictly for reporting suspected tax fraud, tax evasion, and unreported income. I filled it out meticulously. I provided the exact name and address of the nightclub he worked at, the estimated dates of his employment, and highly specific details about his hidden crypto wallets that he had carelessly left logged in on the family's shared computer network months ago. I submitted the tip completely anonymously. The IRS does not move quickly, but I knew that when they finally do, they move with the crushing, inescapable weight of a federal steamroller. While I was quietly setting these devastating legal traps, my cell phone was absolutely blowing up with calls from the flying monkeys. The worst offender by far was my Aunt Clara, Sylvia's older sister. Aunt Clara was the extended family's self-appointed moral compass, a woman who absolutely loved to insert herself into other people's drama so she could play the wise, superior peacemaker. On Friday evening, she called my phone for the 6th time. I decided to answer it just to see what kind of twisted narrative my parents were spinning. "Julian, sweetie," Aunt Clara said the second I picked up, her voice dripping with fake, sugary concern. "I am just so heartbroken. Your mother called me today, and she is completely inconsolable. She cries every single day. Victor is under so much tremendous stress at work. You need to come home and apologize to them. We all make mistakes, Julian, but family is family. You can't just abandon your own blood over a silly argument about groceries." A silly argument about groceries. That was the pathetic lie they were actively spinning to the entire extended family. They were intentionally painting me as a petty, unhinged, dramatic brat who ran away from home simply because his younger brother ate his chicken. "Aunt Clara," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of emotion, "did Victor happen to mention to you that he committed federal identity theft?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Did he mention," I continued relentlessly, "that he forged my signature on a loan document and racked up nearly $7,000 in hidden debt under my name to fund his lifestyle? Did Sylvia mention that she went through my private desk drawers looking for my tax returns so they could extort me for $1,000 a month in rent?" Dead silence. The manipulative script she had carefully prepared suddenly burst into flames. I don't know anything about that," she stammered, her voice suddenly high and nervous. "I'm sure there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this. Victor is a good, hard-working man. You know how hard it is to maintain a real estate property these days with inflation. You shouldn't be threatening him with a lawsuit or the police, Julian. Think about the family's reputation in the community. The family's reputation is built entirely on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and financial exploitation," I replied smoothly. "And just so you are fully aware, I have already filed the police report. I am working with a consumer advocacy lawyer. The massive debt is being legally forced back onto him. If you want to help Victor so badly, I suggest you open your own checkbook and hand over $7,000, because I am officially done funding his life. And Clara, if you ever call my phone again trying to manipulate me on their behalf, you will be blocked permanently. Do not contact me again." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for her response. I immediately blocked her number, along with Sylvia's, Victor's, Sebastian's, and Nora's. The digital wall was now fully erected. They were entirely, permanently cut off from my energy, my time, and my bank account. The silence that followed in the coming weeks was profound and beautiful. I didn't check their social media accounts. I didn't ask mutual friends about them. I simply let them vanish. Instead, I poured every single ounce of my newly freed mental energy into my career. Without the constant, exhausting emotional drain of living in that highly toxic house, my performance at work skyrocketed. I was no longer sleep-deprived. I was no longer depressed. My focus was laser-sharp. 2 months later, my manager, Mr. Henderson, called me into a private virtual meeting. He praised my recent network security overhaul, noting that my productivity had doubled. He offered me a massive promotion to senior network director. It came with a 30% salary increase, full corporate benefits, and a highly generous stock option plan. I signed the new employment contract with a steady, confident hand. I looked around my quiet, peaceful apartment, now fully furnished with high-quality things I had picked out myself. I had won. But the universe has a very funny way of balancing the scales of justice, and the absolute destruction of Victor and Sebastian's world was just over the horizon. Fast forward a little over a year. The seasons outside my apartment window had changed, and so had I. I was absolutely thriving. I had built a solid, supportive group of friends. I was traveling on the weekends. I was aggressively investing my new, higher salary into real estate funds and a robust retirement account. The terrible nightmares about being trapped in that damp concrete basement had finally, completely stopped. I had maintained strict, absolute no contact with my entire family. But in a small, highly interconnected suburban world, news always manages to trickle through the cracks. And the news regarding my former family was nothing short of catastrophic. I heard the glorious details through Marcus, whose mother still gossiped heavily with the neighborhood women at the local salon. Victor's financial house of cards had completely, spectacularly collapsed. The credit bureaus had successfully processed my identity theft affidavit with Stella's legal backing. My name and social security number were completely scrubbed from the fraudulent debt, and the full, crushing weight of the defaulted account, along with all the late fees, was slammed directly onto Victor's credit report. Because he was already drowning in other hidden credit card debts, this sudden default was the fatal blow to his financial standing. His credit score plummeted into the low 400s. When his old, beaten-up work truck finally broke down on the highway, he confidently went to a local dealership to finance a new one. He was laughed out of the finance manager's office. No bank would touch him. He was completely blacklisted from any legitimate financial institution. Desperate to cover the aggressive collection agencies threatening a lawsuit and immediate wage garnishment, Victor tried to take out a second mortgage on the family home. He was flat out denied. The financial strain became so suffocating that the grand illusion of the perfect, happy marriage between Victor and Sylvia shattered completely. Marcus told me that neighbors frequently heard them screaming obscenities at each other in the driveway late at night. Sylvia, who had always relied entirely on Victor's income and my rent money to fund her comfortable, ignorant lifestyle, was abruptly forced to get a retail job at a local department store just to help pay the mortgage and keep the lights on. There were loud, constant rumors circulating the neighborhood of an impending, very messy divorce. But the most spectacular, satisfying downfall of all belonged to the golden child, Sebastian. A few months prior, Sebastian had somehow managed to charm his way into an engagement with a girl named Nina. Nina was the daughter of a very wealthy, prominent local real estate developer. Sebastian had completely fabricated his entire life to impress her. He wore fake designer watches he bought online, leased a luxury car he couldn't actually afford, and confidently claimed he was an independent crypto investor waiting on a massive inheritance from an imaginary wealthy uncle. He was aiming for the ultimate grift, marrying into immense wealth so he would never have to work a single day of hard labor in his life. The wedding invitations, printed on expensive cardstock, had already been sent out to hundreds of guests. It was going to be a lavish, incredibly expensive country club affair paid for entirely by Nina's family. And then, just weeks before the ceremony, the IRS knocked on his door. My anonymous tip from a year prior had finally made its way through the slow, grinding bureaucratic maze of the federal government. The IRS launched a full, aggressive, no-stones-unturned audit into Sebastian's finances. They uncovered the under-the-table bartending cash. They subpoenaed his cryptocurrency exchange records and found massive, undeclared capital gains that he had hidden. They hit him with a devastating, five-figure tax bill, combined with massive financial penalties for willful evasion and fraud. Because he had zero actual savings, the IRS immediately moved to freeze his bank accounts. Nina's father, a shrewd, cutthroat businessman who already suspected Sebastian was a smooth-talking fraud, used the sudden IRS audit as an excuse to hire a private investigator. The investigator dug deep into Sebastian's background and uncovered absolutely everything. The total lack of legitimate employment, the crushing tax debt, the fact that he was completely financially dependent on his parents, and the reality that his family was currently teetering on the very edge of foreclosure and bankruptcy. Nina was completely humiliated. Her family was furious at the deception. They didn't just cancel the wedding. They completely obliterated Sebastian's social standing in the community. Nina publicly called off the engagement on social media, vaguely but aggressively citing irreconcilable financial deceptions and lies. Sebastian lost the rich fiancé, lost the luxury car when it was immediately repossessed by the dealership, and was now legally bound to a massive federal tax debt he could never hope to pay off on a minimum wage salary. The golden child had flown entirely too close to the sun, fueled by arrogance, and his wings had melted completely, sending him crashing down into reality. When Marcus told me the whole story over beers one Friday night, I didn't laugh loudly. I didn't cheer or gloat. I just took a slow, quiet sip of my drink and felt a deep, profound sense of closure. They had built a house entirely out of exploitation, expectations, and control. When I removed myself as the foundational pillar, the entire structure collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. But there was still one final, symbolic thread connecting me to them. A digital tether that I needed to cut to officially, permanently end this chapter of my life. A few weeks after hearing about Sebastian's ruined country club wedding, I sat at my sleek desk in my apartment. It was a rainy, peaceful Sunday afternoon. I opened my laptop and navigated to a shared Google Drive folder that had been sitting in the back of my mind. Years ago, when I was the de facto unpaid IT guy and administrative assistant for the entire family, I had set up a shared cloud drive. It was supposed to be a convenient place for family photos, shared recipes, and emergency contact lists. Over the years, because my parents were so lazy, it had morphed into a digital junk drawer that Victor and Sylvia used to store scanned tax documents, insurance policies, medical records, and passwords. They were completely technologically illiterate. They relied entirely on me to maintain it and organize it. Even after I left, I noticed through notifications that they were still actively dropping files into it, assuming I was still silently managing their digital lives from afar, acting as their invisible servant. It was finally time to evict them. I logged in with my master administrative privileges. I highlighted every single folder. The tax returns, the insurance documents, the scanned passports, the recipe for Sylvia's terrible dry meatloaf. I hit delete. I emptied the digital trash can, wiping their digital history from the servers permanently. Let them figure out how to recover their own passwords. Then I created one single new folder in the empty drive. I titled it in all capital letters, Contributions. Inside that folder, I began uploading PDFs and screenshots. I uploaded the bank statements showing every single $400 rent payment I had ever made since I was 17 years old. I uploaded the grocery receipts from Walmart. I uploaded the internet bills, the electric bills, and the streaming service invoices. I uploaded everything I had ever given them. Then, I uploaded the most important document of all. I uploaded the official credit dispute resolution letter from Stella, my lawyer, clearly stating that Victor had committed fraud, and that the massive debt had been permanently reassigned to him due to his illegal actions. Finally, I opened a blank text document. I typed a single, final message to them. For 27 years, I thought love was a transaction. I thought if I sacrificed enough of my money, my time, and my sanity, you would eventually look at me as a son instead of a resource. I was wrong. The documents in this folder represent every single thing I gave to this family. You bled me dry, and when I asked for basic respect, you told me I was nothing without you. Look closely at this folder. This is my actual legacy in your house. I paid for my existence tenfold. You did not build me. I survived you. I am thriving without you. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. The bank is officially closed. I saved the document, placed it in the center of the folder, and then revoked all of my own access to the drive, leaving them as the sole owners of a digital graveyard filled with their own sins and my receipts. I closed the laptop and exhaled deeply. A massive, physical weight lifted off my chest, evaporating into the cool air of my apartment. It was truly over. The funeral for the family I never truly had was finally complete. Months turned into another year. I continued to grow, to heal, to build my life. I started officially mentoring young, entry-level IT guys at my company, making sure they knew their worth and didn't let corporate bullies like Derek take advantage of their eagerness. I volunteered. I lived my life with intentional, fierce, unapologetic independence. One evening, while scrolling through a mutual friend's social media feed, a photo popped up. It was a picture taken at a local community event. Standing near the edge of the frame were Victor, Sylvia, Sebastian, and Nora. I stopped scrolling and zoomed in on the image. They were all standing together, but they looked like absolute strangers forced to wait at the same bus stop. Victor looked aged, his face heavily lined with stress and bitterness, his shoulders slumped. Sylvia looked exhausted, her fake smile completely gone. I am Julian. I am 29 years old now, and I am finally truly free. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. My journey taught me a harsh but incredibly necessary lesson. Family is not defined by blood, and respect is not something you should ever have to purchase with your own suffering. You are allowed to walk away from people who only value what they can extract from you. You are allowed to protect your future, your finances, and your peace of mind. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to establish a hard boundary with someone